Today, I'm interviewing Brian Tinsman from Wonders of the First. Really excited about the new game coming out. The first Shattering is happening in March. There's all sorts of crazy shenanigans on the way. Brian is the lead designer and creator of the game. Is that how you'd refer to yourself, Brian?
Yeah, game design lead.
Game design lead. Brian has a history developing for Magic the Gathering and many other games. Before we get to all of the crazy questions, first I have to ask the one question that everyone's waiting to know, Brian. Who is the prisoner, and how do we free them?
That card is going to have to remain a mystery for the time being. We're being coy about it, and we're not giving any info on that. That's like the
I know, that's why I need to know.
The Area 51 of the project.
I gotta ask the tough questions. Can you at least give me a morsel? Will the mechanics of the prisoner change over time? Can you just tell me that?
I believe that at some point the prisoner will be freed, and when the prisoner is freed, then it suddenly will turn on, and its mechanics will change.
And is the prisoner an actual card? Can we just confirm that?
Yeah, it's a card. It's a card in the set.
It is a card. At some point, it may or may not be freed, and mechanics could change.
To clarify what you're asking, like the prisoner is a card. You're asking if it's like physically printed in boosters, or are you asking if it's like a character in the universe?
Yes.
It's both. It's yes to both.
Yes to both. Okay. It is a character. Does the character have anything to do with the first Shattering in lore?
I'm not going to disclose any more information. You know, when we first made it, I was kind of considering, like, you know, I think I have some memory loss. Like, I don't even remember where it came from, so that I could dodge these kinds of questions.
Glorious. Well, I managed to get a little bit of tidbits out of you. Can we expect other things like this? Whatever this ends up being in the future, is this sort of a precursor to how you see the game unfolding over the long term?
Yeah, so over many years of CCG design, there are lots of ideas about, you know, fun things or Easter eggs or things that could be slow reveals that I never got the chance to do, and so here's a chance to pull some of those tricks out.
I love it. I love how thoughtfully lore seems to be implemented in this game. What sets Wonders of the First apart from other games in your eyes? Like, what's the main thing that really sparked to you as being like what makes it different and what makes it worth creating, pursuing?
Wonders is the first time I've ever seen a community so heavily involved in the development of a project like this. And, you know, you talk sometimes about bottom-up design or top-down design, right? Bottom-up is where you have some mechanics and then you try to get a character molded around the mechanics, or top-down is you have an idea for a character and then create mechanics that match up with it. Right. And this is neither of them. This is the team first created over 4,000 characters and art pieces and sent them out to the community of fans or people who were interested and just wanted to be involved with it. And then the favorites rose to the top of the community. And so we kind of knew, okay, here are the ones that are going to be the most popular. There's a crowdsourcing element to this now. And then the game design team was presented with the opportunity here to like create a whole rule system that's going to support the story of all these characters and abilities for all these characters. So instead of like top down or bottom up, I'm like, it's inside out design, right? You normally never would create characters first you'd have an established IP, or you'd have a game design rule system. No, we did it all backwards. So that's super cool. But
interesting.
Yeah, there's a much more answers to the question too.
So it's not bottom up or top down, it's inside out.
Yeah.
We'll call it inside out design.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the things in my opinion that sets this game apart from other games out there is how you
sorry to interrupt. I believe that I was the first person to coin the term top-down design anywhere in the game design field. I can't prove that, and if somebody can prove it wrong, I'll happily rescind. But I remember in the early 2000s trying to convince people within R&D that Form of the Dragon was a top-down design, because normally red would never have a moat-like effect, right? You can't be attacked by things that don't fly. And so part of my defense was to come up with this idea of, look, top-down is a design that hooks on to things that people are already familiar with, and they get it immediately, and you can break color pie rules by that. And so that's documented in the internal Magic development database, which was called Multiverse at the time. And anybody who has access to that, people who still work at Wizards have access, because every interaction is timestamped in that database. They can go up and look up and confirm that date, or deconfirm it. So anyways,
yeah, I've always loved top-down design because it's you want to achieve a certain feeling in the player, and then you approach the mechanics second to try and get to that feeling. Like with Form of the Dragon, you want them to feel like they're a dragon. How do we make a card that makes that happen, you know? Rather than, oh, here's a cool card that did this thing, and I guess it makes me feel like a dragon, so let's call it Form of the Dragon, which would be top up, or bottom up, rather than top down. So very, very cool, and I think some of the better games tend to use both really well, bottom up and top down. So thank you for your contributions, for sure. But what I really like about this game is the way you use the action and energy economies, and I think that's one of the things that sets it apart. It has two different resources that you're trying to manage at the same time that sort of tie into each other, one being actions and one being energy. What led you to going that route? Did you ever consider just one resource, or maybe three different resources, and then land on two? Or how did you arrive at where you're at with action and energy, and why do you feel like it's the best road forward for this game?
Yeah, in early system playtesting, we did just have energy, because when you do game design, you want to have a mix of original mechanics to make it feel fresh and different, and familiar mechanics, because if it's all original, then it's difficult for people to understand. There's nothing, it's very hard to learn. So we knew we wanted to have some kind of energy mechanic because it's so familiar, so well proven. And we had a system where the winner of a realm was just auto calculated, and the moment that you had a higher power total, the stone would instantly change sides. Slow down gameplay a whole bunch, because anytime anything happened on the board, you potentially have to recalculate the current owners of 7 different realms.
Right.
And so as a way to speed up gameplay, we introduced the idea that a stone only moves when a player initiates the movement of the stone. And the entire action economy system came out of that.
Right.
And then, of course, as soon as you see a mechanic like that working, you can start to relate it to other games. Dominion was the one that came to mind because like that's used super elegantly. So there's precedent for that there.
I kind of love how every single thing you can do in the game requires deliberate agency on the part of the player, and it's not like other games where you can respond to what your opponent's doing and you don't have to like commit to a game plan ahead of time because you'll see what they do and adapt. You really can't. You have to commit to that agency ahead of time. You have to really plan things out ahead and get in front of things, because there's no reacting. There's no real stopping what your opponent is doing other than trying to get in front of it and trying to see multiple turns ahead. And in that way, it's a lot like chess. So I think having actions specifically and choosing to make that sort of deliberate gameplay the backbone of the game really sets it apart, in my opinion. But just observations I've noticed on my end.
Cool, thanks. Another thing that pulled us in the direction of the action system is the ability to respond without having to wait for your opponent to make a decision. Like the back and forth turn taking,
right,
is a super strong feature. And like I'm partly traumatized by being a producer on very early days of Magic Online, Modo, right? So this is like before we had the current smooth interfaces. And if you play Magic by the actual technical rules, like, you have to pause with almost every single thing you do and click, okay. Like, it was excruciating to play a game of Magic that way. And nobody actually does, right? We all use shortcuts. And so like, this is the way to build that into the rules so that I can do a thing. No, I won't be interrupted in doing my thing. You have a chance now to respond, play a guy, you can respond and kill my guy before I can attack or tap. But I don't have to like pause all action in order to know that my action is complete. Love that aspect of it.
Yes, I agree. I agree for sure. So there are some other elements to the game that I want to get into a bit later, like the DBS system and a no reprint policy and stuff like that. But before we start getting into the nitty gritty with all of that, let's just let's go down that rabbit hole with development a little bit. So what's the biggest difference between the original vision for this game and what the final product ended up being? What did you change the most? I know you mentioned how you were exploring just using energy at the start. Was that the biggest change, or was there something else fundamental that you think really sets apart the end result from where your head was at the start?
Yeah, that is the big one. But my official answer is the use of lands, because we knew we wanted to have lands in the game, and we didn't want them to operate like Magic lands. So we went through a lot of iterations of how to use them for resources and how to activate them, and we came to this kind of unusual situation where you can tap a land to harvest an action from it, which, you would think that you could make a whole deck full of lands and just play them all and, cycle through your entire deck that way. But you got to spend actions to draw and spend actions to play. And so we were able to kind of like make it work out so that a deck really is optimized, having around 10 lands in a 50-card deck. Awesome, that's great. We also don't have basic lands, which is unusual, I think. And early on, it was the design team thought it was inelegant to have tap lands on the board that are never going to untap and just sit there kind of looking useless. So we had you sacrificing lands to gain an action or an energy. And if you're an experienced Magic player, you're probably already intuitively thinking that the ability for a land to self-sack is potentially highly abusable. Sack outlets are wonderful for combo players, and
Absolutely.
so we had tons of sack the land and then put them back in untapped, and
I think
endless combos.
I think the lands are probably my favorite part of the game. Every other game I've played in the past has always been to one extreme or the other, I feel. With Magic the Gathering as an example, I feel like there's too much variance with the lands, and I think in early versions of that game it wasn't problematic because of power creep hadn't set in yet, and the amount of power in one turn, the amount you could do in a single turn, was a lot lower. But lately, with how powerful everything is, you can do so much in one turn that if you kind of whiff a turn, it's too much of a separation. It lets one player get too far ahead, so variance is kind of more of a problem. And I always felt like with a game like Magic, the lands for where the power level is at offer too much variance. But then on the flip side, you have digital games like Hearthstone or Legends of Runeterra, and they don't have any lands whatsoever. Their energy is automatic all the time, and I feel like they don't have enough variance. And you'll actually see games like that implement a lot of RNG into the cards themselves to try to artificially add that variance back into the game, because they don't have it as far as drawing and whether or not you're going to draw a land. And your game sits squarely in the middle, where you have kind of the pros of, okay, you're going to get energy every turn. You're never going to be stuck not being able to do anything. But at the same time, you're incentivized to add that variance into your deck and to have that chance of drawing a card that might not be as powerful as the thing that you would otherwise draw, because you need those lands, because they offer, the cost reduction and the prerequisites for core cards and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's very elegant that you settled on something that's right in the middle. I think it's kind of perfect, and it honestly solves all of the problems that I have in all of those games, which is kind of what originally got me excited about this game at the start. That was probably the number one thing. So kudos to you for figuring that out. How has the game evolved? I know we talked about the biggest things, but what are the little things?
The gameplay is quite different from most other CCGs, even though it is battling. The victory condition is seizing stones, taking control of realms. So, physical placement of your cards matters on the board. And so because of that, a lot of our intuitions of what might be good, what might be bad, were,
Right.
It didn't match our first guess. One of the things we found out was that alternate victory conditions are not fun. We had quite a few cards that said, if you give enough soul burn counters to your opponent, they lose on the spot. And players really hated that stuff. The early version of Cooking Pot of the Eternal Flame also was, if you get 20 meat counters on it, you win the game. And now we've changed it to you gain control of all wonders on the board, which is almost the same thing, but not necessarily.
But it's nice to have alternate win conditions that aren't actually alternate win conditions, but they are. I think that's a better way to go about it.
And for a long time in the development of the game, deny was you could deny your deck or the opponent's deck, but people really pushed back against deck strategies they hated it when they got milled out, and like much more so than I've seen before in other games, and so like trying to figure out why is that, right? And I think it's because part of the fun of this game is being able to analyze the board state and figure out a plan, sort of the more chess-like components of, okay, if I play here and then they play there. And when you start to go with alternate victory conditions, all of that can be kind of meaningless. Like you're playing a different game from me right now, and either you get to do your milling thing or you don't, and it's kind of out of my control. So that was a nice lesson for us to learn.
One thing I noticed about this game is how there aren't really a lot of alternate win conditions. I know in playtesting you had those soul burn counters and stuff like that. The one biggest difference from something like Magic the Gathering that I've noticed is you don't have to survive long enough to win. Everyone gets to play the full game. You play the full 7 rounds no matter what. And so if you're playing like a combo deck or a control deck with a big finish, you know you're going to be able to get to round 7 and do your thing no matter what. Was there ever any kind of consideration of a mechanic that forced decks like that to contend with the opponent more and to maybe stop the game from ending too soon, having to worry about your opponent being too aggressive and having to kind of put a stop to that? Or
yeah, that's a super meaty design issue, because once we came up with the gameplay system, it became apparent that like all strategies don't work the same way, traditionally within that system. Like as you said, every game goes to round 7, and so that means like an aggressive strategy that typically like a Zerg Rush wins on turn 3 or turn 4 or something like that, and then it's over. You don't have to worry about it anymore. But like we had our aggressive decks, they would take control and then like fizzle out on the remainder of the game. So what do you do to make that viable? And it was very difficult needle to thread, and we ended up putting a bunch of defensive stuff in the game, and also that helped bring us towards the idea of stones earn you an energy bonus every round, right? And that is conventional game design wisdom says, do not mix the streams of your victory condition and your resource generation, right? Because it leads to snowball get ahead. But we wanted some snowball to happen in the game, right? And so it was not clear to me during development that was even going to work out, but it did, and you end up with a system that doesn't quite play like anything else.
Like myself, I thought maybe some sort of mechanic where like if you had all 5 stones at the end of round 5, the game ends early. And I think an idea like that wouldn't necessarily be for people to actually win that way. It should be very hard to actually win that way, but it would force some of those late game decks to have to not spend the entire game building up to their big end game thing they want to do. They have to take their eye off the ball a little bit and contend with what the opponent's doing and put a little something in front of their steamrolling all of the stones to stop it. So was an idea like that ever considered?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's still potentially on the table, but it's one of those things that is going to require delicacy, and getting it right when you tune it. So it kind of got like kicked off to some future set. Right, for sure. Because that also has the potential, like if you get multiple of those, can start to feel like an alternate win condition and have it feels bad. So I think if the game actually ends that way, more than 1% of the time, it's gonna feel really bad for players. So the
core, I think, would be to try and come up with a way where it's hardly ever going to happen. It just forces your opponent to play a little bit differently and have to contend with you a bit, which I think would be interesting. But
yeah.
Anyway, we could theory craft all day.
Yeah. There's upside to the 7-round system too, in that like gameplay length is pretty predictable. It's very, very rare to have a game that goes way too long or way too short. But also it makes it naturally resistant to early turn combos, because even you know, get turn 2 or turn 3 overwhelming combo, there's no guarantee that you're still going to have that huge advantage by the later rounds in the game. So that's actually pretty nice for power balancing.
Did you ever consider like sideboarding as an option for this game? And did you ever reach a point where you realized the games were long enough that in tournament play you probably wouldn't be able to do something like best 2 out of 3?
Yeah, that was I was thinking we'd have multiple rounds for most of the time of the development, but the team talked me out of it, and I agree with it now.
I think it's kind of like pick your poison, you know? Either the game goes the length that you want and you get to have the depth that's there, or you have to make some concessions in order to make the game shorter so that you can have best 2 out of 3 in sideboards. And personally, I'm glad you guys went the route you did, because it makes the game a little bit more unique. But yeah, interesting stuff. What were some of the biggest surprises concerning like card combos or interactions where when you were designing you didn't really see it coming, and then the playtest team came back with something? Was there anything like that stood out to you as like really unexpected or surprising?
Quite a few of the cards right now that say gain free attacks used to say gain free actions. And that led to endless, infinite loops, infinite combos. And so we had to figure out that placing restrictions on actions, right? Here's an action you can only use for one thing, and that's kind of what draw a card is too. Like, you know, a cantrip is just an action that you can only use for a specific application. Right. Exactly. And so you can extend that to all the different things that you can do with actions. So we were able to nearly eliminate all of the infinite combos in the game. But there were a lot, and we spent a lot of time going back and forth and like, do we want this in the game? Like, it's kind of cool, like you said, to have an unusual way to win, as long as it's not dominant, right? Like, I think it's fair to have an infinite combo that happens, 5% of the time or something like that.
Right.
But if it gets out of control, it's super unfun. Right. And so, like, if you're gonna err, you want to err on the side of too little rather than too much. So
personally, I prefer alternate win conditions that the true intent isn't to actually win that way, but to force your opponent to play a certain way that they don't really want to play in order to react to having to stop that win condition. I think those kinds of win conditions have always been my favorite in the past. So I think your head's in the right place for sure, as far as what I want to see come out of this game. So we talked a little bit earlier about top-down and bottom-up design. Were there any cards specifically that you can think of offhand that had a top-down design from the get-go, that you guys came in with an idea that you know for sure you wanted to do?
It's a strange situation to have a first set where nobody has a baseline of what all the orbitals, right, or classes, what to expect from them. And so you're setting such a huge precedent for future sets. So even doing a top-down type of card, you could take it in a lot of directions, and sometimes like you want to keep it a little bit mild or a little bit vanilla, so that you can build off of it and have variants of it that are interesting in later sets. So kind of leaned in that direction. The T set is one that I think falls in the category of a strange top-down card, and the idea there is it allows players to switch control of all the stones on the board, and so we kind of had this idea, like a T set. It's little cups and a little teapot, and you're gonna sit down and like that's not something that would normally go in a battle-focused fantasy game, and yet here it is in
hilarious.
in the set of characters, and so like what can you build around that? So we had this idea of like, oh, we're gonna have a little sit down, a little party, a little.
Isn't there a tea party in Alice in Wonderland?
Yeah, right.
So maybe we get a character named Alice in a later expansion, and she has some kind of mechanic that, just as a nod, that has to do with the tea set.
Mad Hatter.
Just throwing it out there. Was there any like big idea that you always wanted to do for Magic back when you were working on Magic that you never got to do, and then as soon as you knew you were doing this game, you were like, now's my chance, I'm definitely going to do that thing? Was there anything like that at all?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Probably tons of stuff that got left on the cutting room floor during your Magic days.
Yeah. Being able to have variable numbers of cards that go in a deck. So our system right now is you can have 1, 2, or 3 copies,
right?
And that allows you to do some one of per deck cards that are quite strong and swingy, but you're not going to be able to build around. And then the 3 of per decks, it presents a challenge to the deck builder to say, here are some effects that you're pretty reliably going to have access to. Can you build around those, right? So you get a nice conquest.
I kind of love those constraints. I mean, the fact that the most powerful tools available to you are not going to be things you can build around consistently, I think is a real breath of fresh air. And I also like that the really powerful legendary cards, like, you don't have to worry about getting multiple copies. If you're just, a kid having fun in a card shop and you pull a legendary and you're like, oh, I want to use it in my deck, you just can. You don't have to worry about, well, now I got to come up with 2, 3 other copies of this, and I have to spend a bunch of money, which, I mean, they might go that route anyway. But I think everything about the 1, 2, and 3 with the legendaries, primaries, and secondaries really speaks to me. I think, I don't know, you just made a lot of good decisions, okay?
Thanks. I was the one who designed Magic's Relentless Rats, which was the first instance of a card that said you can have any number of these.
Right.
Been riffing off of that for ages.
There's one of those in this game, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's right. Pink Spore Dream Cap.
Right? Yeah.
Breaks those rules.
Very cool. Very cool. The pacing of Wonders of the First, in comparison to some of the past projects that you've worked on, any comments in regards to that? Different, the same, better, worse? How do you feel about the pacing?
You're talking about the process of development, and
correct.
How fast we had to hit our deadlines.
How much time you have to let things breathe or not, and how much wiggle room you have to really kind of feel out the project, and time to decide where to go and all that good stuff.
Yeah, we had a good amount of time, and so like this company is a little unusual in that it's a well-established company, but they didn't have a lot of game publishing experience, and so we weren't under super high pressure to, like we're going to run out of money at any time, or that we needed to hit a certain deadline. And so really our main factor, our main concern was, will the community love it? Will the community get mad if we take a really long time to get this out? Will the community have a positive response?
Right.
Which is, it's really, really different from how most most games either have like distribution deal that you have to launch at a certain date because of, you've made agreements with partners or something like that, or you're gonna run out of funds and you need to launch soon to get the money. So we had time to get it right.
That's good to hear. And that has me optimistic about future sets as well, which I am very excited about. I won't be asking about that too much in this interview because I know the focus is on the launch of Existence, the first set and all of that. But as a fan, I'm just excited about the future. Do you have a favorite card or mechanic within this set, within the game? Just from a strictly, not an objective point of view, but a subjective point of view, just your personal tastes.
Seek is really fun. Seek is the mechanic that says reveals a certain number of cards from the top of your deck, and if you find one that meets the criteria, you can play it for free. And it reminds me a little bit of the Miracle mechanic, which was a personal quest in my Magic development days.
Miracle's so
crazy. And I was told flat out by head of the tuning and balancing team that it would never be possible to do an on-draw trigger. And so I had to work through many versions of that before we finally found the one that was acceptable. And it still has some draw sides, has some drawbacks to it. But Seek is closer to what a lot of the cards that I had in mind when developing that mechanic that didn't really live up to the full vision that I would have liked to have done with it. And now we get to now we get to like really rev that engine here.
Yeah, I really love Seek too. I like that you get to look at the top however many cards. There's a chance for it to whiff, which doesn't feel good, but there's also plenty of chances to deck build in a way where you can manipulate the top of the deck and reduce the chances of whiffing. I just played against a Seek deck the other night, and they got all of their cards that they want to find while seeking in their opening hand, and then whiffed for the first half of the game, and then came back and managed to do the things they wanted to do in the second half of the game, and it ended up being really, really close by the end. So it's a pretty interesting mechanic. I like it.
Well, one of the goals that you kind of want to have is to create in-game moments that stick in people's memories, right? And so Seek has the potential to be like, I'm behind, and if I seek the right card, it can pull out the last second victory. And as long as that doesn't happen very often,
right?
You'll forget about the 9 times it didn't happen, but you'll remember the one time it did happen. Just be like, want to tell people about it for days afterwards. That's the success of a good game design.
Here's a personal question. What is your favorite game that you've never had a hand in designing? Whether it's from before your designing career or something you picked up during.
Yeah.
Chutes and Ladders as a kid.
Probably No Man's Sky. I've got hundreds and hundreds of hours in No Man's Sky VR, and it's all procedurally generated worlds, and I have a visual map thinking type of system in my brain, where if I'm gonna look, if I'm gonna go somewhere, I want to look at a map and I want to visualize a path. And like when I spell words, I see them in my mind and then I just read them off. So it's like a very visual systems oriented thing. And like, so No Man's Sky and games with elaborate maps and things like that, like fits into all the sockets of my brain.
You playing that on PSVR?
On Oculus 3.
Oculus 3. We just got a PSVR 2 for Christmas, and I re-downloaded No Man's Sky. I got it back when it first came out years ago, and played it a bunch, and then haven't touched it since. And I know it got a ton of updates over the years, and finally re-download it now that we have a PSVR 2 for the PS5. And so I could see why you'd like it so much.
Mm-hmm. I also have hundreds of hours in VR Google Maps too, which is like 3D renderings of most major cities, and you can just fly around and look in people's backyards and be as nosy as you want.
That's so rad. Were there any big lessons you learned along the way throughout your career that changed how you design games now compared to how you designed them when you were designing early Magic sets when you first started? Is there like one big lesson you learned where you do things really differently now, or do something really differently now than you did in the early days?
Yeah, so in the early days, I had less appreciation for tradition and the craft and process of it, and I just kind of wanted to try a lot of stuff and see what happened. And I got lucky in that I could work on some big brands like, Magic and Pokemon and things like that. If you do something that's, a risk, you took a risk and it didn't work out, those player bases are large enough that it's not going to destroy the product.
Yeah, you'll have time to come back from it.
Yeah. So, these days, I recognize the importance of having the foundation of the game should be by the book, and shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel as much. And then the part that's fresh and new, that should be the game units, right? That should be it's a nice way to divide up game design is system design and then set design. So right, system design is the rules engine, the framework of you take a turn and what can you do on a turn, and
Right.
what's a victory condition, right? And then set design is all the pieces. This is a dragon, how much health should it have, right? And that stuff is going to change all the time, but the rules engine is not going to change over time. So like be very, very solid on your rules engine, and then have fun and take risks with the card designs.
Right, so the cake is very respectful of legacy, whereas the icing is where you get wild.
Yeah, great way to put it.
All right, let's move on and talk about a couple of pretty crazy new things that you're doing with this game. One of them being DBS, and the other one being the no reprint policy. So first, let's talk about DBS. For our viewers, could you explain what DBS is and what the goals are for the DBS system?
Yeah, DBS stands for Dynamic Balance Score, and it's a point costing system. So you can add up the points of all the cards in your deck and get 1,017 points, and now you use that for matchmaking. You know that if you come up against a deck that only has 700 points, you're going to be a lot higher than them. And Magic players kind of try to do this already when they say, "Oh, my deck is a 7 out of 10. Oh, mine's a 9 out of 10." Good matchup, bad matchup. Subjective. We're doing it for real here. And of course, the point costs are not printed on the cards; they're only on the database, so that they can change over time. And so what this allows is, if the metagame starts to become unbalanced, you can slowly adjust the points to match reality, right? And this is something that you see quite often in online games, or Warhammer 40K uses this to good effect. And so that means that essentially you never need to have a banning of a card, right? You can kind of it's a continuous soft ban on every card in existence, and so if something is really awful and you don't want to see it dominating the metagame, slowly raise the point cost of it until it's no longer worthwhile to put it in a deck. And of course, it's all optional, right? It's not like you can't build a deck,
right,
unless you follow it. But
if you're sitting down casually at the table,
tool.
If you're sitting down casually at the table with your friends, you can choose to ignore it and just play the cards you want to play and have fun. If you want to be competitive, you can pay close attention to it and make sure you're building within the guidelines. I think it's really smart. I wonder, how early or late in the process did the DBS system come into play when you were designing this game?
Fairly late in the process. We knew that we wanted, it's a pretty audacious goal to say that we're never going to have reprints, and we believed we could do it, but we knew that this is an area of game design that is not within the game rules itself, right? This is what cards are legal in what formats, and how can you make sure that both early stage people who got very small print run cards are able to preserve the collectability of those cards, and then at the same time, a new player years later who comes on, you don't want them to hit a brick wall and say oh, it's thousands of dollars to build a deck. Now I can't possibly participate in this
right.
community. And again, another needle that we needed to thread, and most design teams they don't even address this. They come to it as an afterthought. Anyways, so the DBS was the solution that convinced us it was possible.
It actually seems like a very smart solution, kind of perfect in a lot of ways. Did any part of the DBS system come about as sort of a reaction to what's been going on with the Commander format and Magic the Gathering lately, or is that just kind of a happy coincidence, or I guess an unhappy coincidence in the case of Commander? For those who don't know, there were recently some issues with Commander where there were a bunch of bannings, and people are very unhappy because when you spend a lot of money on cards that you want to be able to play in your decks, and then all of a sudden you're told you can't play them in your decks, it can be really frustrating. So did any of that come about because of what happened with Commander, or was it more just coincidental?
No, the DBS system was up and running before that wave of bannings happened, but it was related to the situation where you sit down and somebody pulls out a high-powered deck, and you kind of have an incentive to say this is a 7 out of 10 and underplay it from what it really is, right?
Right.
Because if other people accept that, they'll pull out decks that are a little weaker than yours. You have a better chance to win. And maybe you do have a moderately powered deck, but you just happen to get your best combo or your best play. And then the other people at the table are going to be like, oh man, you lied. That's a much better deck than you play.
Right.
No, I was being honest. I just got lucky. Like, I hate that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's one of the issues we wanted to solve.
Just seems like kind of the perfect fix, or the perfect response to what's happening with Commander in Magic the Gathering. I just find it really interesting. I think if Magic had a system like this in place, you know, from its inception, it might not be going through the problems that it's going through right now. I think it solves a lot of those problems. So, is it safe to assume you have a lot of foresight in making sure that this game avoids problems like that in the future, utilizing a system like this?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Awesome.
we've had quite a few in-depth systems that we've put in place in terms of how do you make adjustments and how do you solve certain situations, right? Because you can have a card that is generally useful and powerful in any deck. Definitely that should have a high point value. But then you can have cards that are only powerful in a very specific situation. This is,
Right.
you know, like Goblin Matron or something like this, right? And you can do data analysis on those cards and say that, like, okay, what is the correlation of Goblin Matron with all these other cards that tend to appear in the same deck together? And then instead of nerfing just like one of those cards very heavily, put a very slight point increase across all of those, so that if those cards are, you know, random goblin card here and there is not priced out of existence when used in some non-focused, like non-goblin deck.
Right.
But when they're put all together, now the sum of that deck is high enough that it's at the appropriate level. So it's like correlation and statistics that we're running on the decks that we see.
And I believe there are 3 different tiers you have for DBS. You have the 750 point decks, the 1,000 point decks, and then the 1,250 point decks.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you come up with those numbers first and then try to assign numbers to each card based on those numbers that you wanted to hit for the deck total, or was it the opposite?
Now, we tuned it for a basic deck to be 1,000 points or under, and then we built a bunch of decks and said, like, you know, what cutoff levels is going to give the largest spread of difference of the kinds of decks that can thrive in there, but still enough room within those, right? Like, because if you made too many cutoffs, then you can't find enough people. You don't want to segment your audience excessively, and you also want to give enough room for variety within each cutoff. And so it ended up being that the 750 level, actually, there's a ton of weird creative cards that are, you know, not generally useful in a lot of decks, but they can shine there because
Right.
the hyper efficient you know, removal and general utility cards are not there to be predators.
The 750 point decks in particular kind of correlate in my mind to like something like Pauper in Magic, but I feel like your game has a bit of an advantage in that you're not actually strictly limited to just commons like a Pauper format would be in Magic. It's like sort of the same thing, but with more design space, with more sort of player agency. You're not actually limited to commons. I think that's kind of interesting. So that's how I see it, just as an outside perspective. How do you feel about the future of DBS? Do you think it's one small step for wonders, but maybe a part of you thinks it's a giant leap for CCGs?
Yeah, I do think it's a giant leap for CCGs. I think we have yet to see it fully in action across a broad tournament spectrum. But from the playing that we've done, pre-launch of the game, it holds up extremely well. It provides lots of cool and interesting deck building space. It provides different metagames within each of those, and it solves a lot of these huge problems about broken cards and bannings, and it allows you to make cards which are in fact very unbalanced, and as they start to become dominant and nearly required, you can price them higher and higher until they're no longer warping things. And you can do that on purpose just to add variety to the meta, right? To shake it up,
right?
When you want to. So it gives a ton of control over the meta. And of course, you don't want to do that excessively or too abruptly, because then people get mad that the card they just acquired suddenly became useless. It's
absolutely
incremental banning.
You have to be careful with it the same way that you're careful with bannings, but I kind of love that it's you have all of the pros of banning a card without really any of the cons of banning a card. It's kind of the best of both worlds, and I really love that about the system. So it seems on the surface like it's going to be great. The 1250 point decks, is that going to be the standard for, like, once you guys really get going with competitive tournaments? Is that going to be the tournament benchmark?
Our current thinking is that it's going to be the 1000 point decks that are the tournament benchmark. Yeah.
So the 1250 are just for those sickos that want to do things that they shouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, and we're giving ourselves a little room here to be able to respond to what players like. So,
Interesting. I'm excited to see how it unfolds, for sure. And it kind of ties in with the next topic, being the no reprint policy. What do you think the pros and cons of that are that made you decide to do it, or made you question whether you should do it? And how are you overcoming some of the problems that arise from having no reprints?
This is a really big topic. The no reprint policy, just to explain how it works, is that a card is printed and then it has up to a 2-year window where it can be reprinted. And after that cutoff, it will never be reprinted again, except there's a small exception there for serialized numbered versions of that card of less than 1,000, which is, typically is not enough to move the playable supply.
There could be the potential for a super rare version of a card released later on, but it would never be released in a way where it would devalue the original card because it would be so rare.
Yeah, great way to put it. So in the current situation with other games, there is an incentive to reprint old valuable cards, partly because new players coming in, those cards may be very expensive, and partly because the company wants to increase the excitement and value of opening, whatever their current set is. But then also, like, the company makes a ton of money when people want to buy zillions of packs to open those old reprints, which in a way they are taking value from existing collections and putting it in their own pockets. And so our approach was protect the collector at all costs and protect your collection. And I have felt this personally because I have a lot of sealed boxes from Urza's Saga era and Tempest era and stuff like that, which a lot of those cards have been reprinted now, and that sealed product is no longer as valuable as it used to be.
Sad.
And so some of those boxes have my own creative work in them, and it's painful to see it devalued. So the conventional wisdom was that a no reprint policy was impossible because new players won't have access to those cards, and the game will be prohibitively expensive, and the old powerful cards will dominate new cards unless there is a very high power creep.
Is there pressure to add power creep in a situation like this?
There is, for sure, because you want players to get excited about whatever the latest set is and want to buy it. And just like over time, statistically, there's the most powerful card out of 400 is going to be a certain power level. The most powerful card out of 4,000 is going to be just stochastically, it's going to be higher. So that's another form of power creep, because people tend to look at the most powerful 1% of cards in any format and ignore the rest. So my approach is that it's quite similar to economic inflation in a national currency, right? So if you have too much inflation, that would be too much power happening, too much power creep, too much power in the most recent sets. Then it devalues the currency that is in savings accounts. It has less power, less demand. And so it erodes the value of their collection. But if you have too little inflation or deflation, then people will hoard their money. They won't spend, and the parallel would be people won't be excited about getting cards from the next set. They'll only be chasing old cards. So what you want is like 2-3%. Inflation keeps the economy healthy, right? So 2-3% of cards are getting obsoleted with new sets, and there's enough power in there for new players to want to chase after cards. And it will hurt some old cards and obsolete them a little bit here and there, but not enough to really devalue people's collections strongly.
There's some inevitability, but I feel like the mark of a good designer is being able to keep the creep in power creep instead of becoming power leap. And so
power leap,
really the ball's in your court. I think you have the chops, and from what I've seen from the game so far, the rest of your team has the chops to keep things in line with where they need to be regardless of a reprint policy. But we'll have to see. The future's unwritten. I'm excited to see what happens for sure. Let's move on and talk about a few specific things regarding the cards themselves before we wrap up the interview. First of all, was there anything super crazy that was cut during the design process that was just too wild?
Some of that stuff we've already talked about. We had cards that would bring back lands from the abyss, and they would come back untapped. And I think we had a series of playtest games where in round 7, it was typically 30 or 40 actions on each side of the table, and we're all kind of head in our hands, how do we get around this? And that it turned out all to be solved by removing self-sacrifice from lands.
How powerful is Phoenix Quill really? Because on the surface, to a Magic the Gathering player, it looks like it's Black Lotus, but after extensively playing the game on my part, I've come to realize it's not quite Black Lotus. How do you feel about it?
So it is Black Lotus, but the game engine doesn't allow it to be exploited like Black Lotus. And so you think Black Lotus and you think about a channel fireball turn 1 win. That can't happen in this game. Can it give you a huge explosive turn? Yes, it can. Can it get you to your cards or your key combo and be useful in almost any deck that you put it into? Yes, it can. But it can't just end the game on the spot. The way you might think, which is great to me. That like it's all the upside and limited downside.
So how powerful is it really? Do you think it qualifies to be in a pantheon of a Wonders of the First Power 9, or let's just say sure. Power 11 for the sake of argument?
Yeah. It's this is the strongest card in this set. For sure.
Really? You think it is?
Yeah.
That was my next question. What do you think is the most powerful card in the game? You do think it's Phoenix Quill?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and partly because it's so versatile, right? Partly you can put it in any deck, and that deck will get more powerful, and it will give you more chances to exploit the power of your other powerful cards, right? So it's a force multiplier in some ways, because a lot of really powerful cards in this set are legendaries, and you never know if those legendaries are going to be close to the top or close to the bottom. So this gives you the ability to wheel your hand to get close to those also, in addition to the energy boost. So any legendary that is in your deck, it's a little more powerful too.
For sure. I'm excited to see how it shakes out once the player base gets their hands on it and really starts putting it through its paces. It's an interesting one for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, so the big question from the development side is what should the DBS be of it? Because it doesn't have the highest DBS in the set. We want people to have some time where it can shine and kick some ass, and we'll get to observe the strength of it, before we start to balance it.
You need to see it do its thing in the wild in its natural habitat before you know if it's a predator or prey. But it's exciting to see where it goes. I think. I don't know. I think there are some decks that will be able to take advantage of it. I don't think it will be as crazy in as many decks as it might appear on the surface. I feel like it's a little bit more build around than it looks, than it appears at first glance. But it'll be interesting to see. And speaking of crazy cards, one last card I really want to ask you about. Tempest Bomb. What the hell were you thinking? Explain to me what the hell you were thinking. First, tell everyone what Tempest Bomb does, and then please explain it to me.
Tempest Bomb is an equipment, and you equip it to one of your wonders and attack with it, and then you destroy all of your wonders, and then you get to reveal the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you get a wonder there, you can make a copy of that wonder in every realm. So you can set 7 copies of it if you do it on round 7.
So what you're saying is that one legendary I have in my deck, I'm now going to have one in every single realm.
That's right.
So what the hell were you thinking?
So early versions of it were super broken. Early versions of it let you make copies of the thing that was attacking, so you could choose what you wanted to attack with, and so you could put it on to a symbiosis guy that's copying the ability of a guy who is making extra copies of items and equipment, and so you make 7 more Tempest bombs hitting the board that are all wonders, and each of those are attaching. It was ridiculous, and it came within a hair's breadth of being cut from the set entirely, because the team was very, very unsure that it could be balanced at all. And the playtest name of it was ''𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛𝑐𝑒 and it so that's
Hurricanen.
Yeah, it's a good example of a bottom-up design, because we didn't actually know what card it was, what art and name it was going to be attached to. But the playtest team spent so much time and energy building decks with it, because everybody wanted to break it, that I couldn't find it within my heart to cut it.
Right. So you just tried to balance it a little bit more, and well, I don't know. It feels to me like maybe there's some kind of a community challenge that's just eking to get out involving Tempest Bomb. What are your thoughts about maybe doing some kind of a challenge to the community that somehow involves making the best, craziest, wildest possible Tempest Bomb deck, or the craziest Tempest Bomb play possible? Something like that be maybe
it sounds amazing.
Interest?
Yeah, actually, so it's entirely possible, or maybe even likely, that the community can find something that the development team has never seen before, because changes happen to the set. You play test a card, changes happen to the set down the line. The old thing doesn't get play tested with the new changes. There's very, very possible that there's something in the set that is crazy and new to all of us.
Well, you heard him, guys. He's interested. So if you want to see something like that happen, leave a comment down below and let us know. And maybe if enough people are interested, we could have some kind of crazy Tempest Bomb challenge in the coming months. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I just think that card is kind of crazy. You are out of your mind, and I love it. That's why I love you, and that's why I love this game. So speaking of the game, to wrap things up, something I really need to know, what are you looking forward to most when it comes to the future of the game? There's so many things to be excited about. There's the success of the game, there's the future sets, there's how players are going to receive it, there's certain card mechanics and how they'll further be developed, and sky's the limit, I'm sure, on all of the different things you guys are excited for on your end concerning the future. But if you had to pick the thing you're the most excited about regarding the future of the game, the thing you want to know, the thing you want to see a couple of years from now.
I want to see a lot of cards come out. I want to see huge sets with small print runs, a lot of cards in them. I've always had. You have to hold me back from doing design, because I just design sets on my own, whether they're going to get published or not, whether I'm asked to or not. The cards just they need to get designed, and it's exciting and wonderful. And so I want to put out a lot of crazy new cards. Right, my whole career, I've sort of had the game designer's curse, in that your mind is always churning, always thinking of new ideas, whether you want it to or not. And you gotta harness the flow of the river, or you can let it flood and cause destruction. So let's harness it.
Exciting stuff. Well, the first shattering is happening in March. The game's about to launch. We're all excited to play it. Thank you so much for this interview, Brian. It's been enlightening. I'm sure there's a lot of tidbits to glean for the community, and just has me even more excited for the set to release, for the game to release, and for everyone to get their hands on these cards. Very exciting stuff. So thank you so much for joining me for this. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much. Love having you on the project in the media side of things, and love your style and your content, and it's lucky to have someone like you.
So I got one last question before we go. No one's ever asked this before, but it's important. Who is the prisoner, and how do we free her?
Wait a second. This is a closely guarded secret that will never. You'll have to torture me before. All
right. You heard it here, folks. The next interview, Brian's gonna let us know who the prisoner is and how we free them. So look forward to the next one. We'll see you there, where I'm sure we'll ask that question again and again and again. Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.